Hello everyone and welcome to the second part of this SOCOM 4 multiplayer beta analysis. In the first one I have discussed aspects mostly related to the aiming system. In this one I will explore the camera system, as well as what's left to be investigated about the move controls. Let's begin by taking a look at the turning dead zones. Highlighted here is the smallest dead zone width you can set, and that's a pretty large one, especially when compared to the minimal dead zone width you can set in Killzone 3, here represented in green. An option to reduce it further would actually be welcome. As you can see by the representation of the vertical dead zone instead, Zipper cleverly located it slightly above the middle of the screen, the red line, in order to mitigate an obvious issue when it comes to pointer-based controls in third-person shooters. The issue being that your character covers portion of the area you can actually shoot at, which is something that never happens with a fixed reticle. So by having the dead zone above the middle of the screen, downward camera rotation is triggered sooner. Not that this solves the issue completely though, since the minimal dead zone is fairly wide. When aiming from over the shoulder, vertical aiming is unaffected by this problem, so the vertical dead zone is centered. But when it comes to horizontal aiming, here comes the need to trigger camera rotation in advance when turning left. Hence the reason why the horizontal dead zone is misaligned towards the right. This is all very clever, but then again I don't see why we are not given the option to shrink the dead zones even further to better prevent the cursor from getting behind the character. On the subject of dead zones, I am happy to report that SOCOM 4 adopts the dynamic edge solution first implemented by Guerrilla Games in Killzone 3, which allows to halt camera rotation quicker than you normally could if you had to wait for the cursor to travel back within the dead zone. The dynamic edge system was also applied to fix the unintentional camera movement issue we have seen in MAG when switching between aim modes with different turning area values. What Zipper did here was to basically have a dynamic edge spawn right on the pointer upon switching, so even if it happens to be in a turning area, the camera doesn't turn. Very clever. On the subject of camera rotation, here is a demonstration of the maximum normal camera speed, which is not as fast as the Killzone 3 one, but at least it's the very same as the DualShock 3 one. About that, it's worth mentioning that while running, and to run you need to press the analog stick, or performing other actions like jumping or vaulting, camera rotates slower, just like with the DualShock 3, but quickly goes back to full speed if you keep the cursor within the turning area when you stop the action, allowing for some rather quick turns, perfectly controllable thanks to the dynamic edge system.
We have wounded!
One last thing to mention about the turning system is that it doesn't take advantage of the absolute tilt detection like the Killzone 3 one does. As you can see here, once the cursor has reached the edge of the screen, that's when you reach top speed, and any further tilting does nothing. Actually, if you tilt past a given angle, the camera stops altogether and the pointer centers, even if the sphere is still perfectly visible by the camera. Not that this happens during normal gameplay, but it's an oddity I felt the need to point out anyway. Now, perhaps in an attempt to simplify camera control, SOCOM 4 employs a camera assist system which automatically levels camera pitch while walking either forward or backwards, based on the assumption that if you are walking straight, you also want to look straight. Well, that's a very wrong assumption. If we pretend the blue icon down there is an enemy we are having a confrontation with, Here is what happens when you strafe around. Yeah, that's pretty bad. Using a DualShock 3 instead, you can perform evasive maneuvers without having to babysit the camera in the process. It goes without saying that this camera assist system is less of an aid and more of a royal pain in the ass during vertical confrontation, as you spend more time fighting the camera than your opponent. The bad news is that there is no option to turn this assist off, and that the only way to keep the camera steady is to go into aiming mode to the expense of speed and visibility, or just to stand still. The good news though is that Zipper is actually considering the removal of this ill-conceived system altogether. Hopefully they extend this intent to a similar camera assist, which have the camera automatically tilt downwards or upwards whenever walking down or uphill. The upwards tilt is especially annoying, because the last thing you want to do when walking up a stair is to look up rather than straight, as you want to spot potential enemies as soon as possible. For the time being, the only way to do this without resorting to the aiming trick is to counter the upwards tilt by having the pointer well within the lower turning area, which then again means having to cover a greater distance with the pointer to reach enemies eventually there. And finally, here is another situation negatively affected by the camera assist. As you can see, moving up and down the top of the staircase to peek and hide requires frequent camera reorientations. Not so with the DualShock 3. And again, the only way to keep the camera level is to go into aiming mode, sacrificing speed and visibility. Moving on, jumping in the SOCOM 4 is on the X button. You can jump while running with it, or bolt over low obstacles. Tapping the triangle button toggles between standing and crouching, while holding it down toggles between standing and proning. You can also dive to prone, which is pretty useful action, allowing to quickly get into cover, avoid fire, or simply confuse enemies.
Enemy secured all sectors. Defend the base.
Be advised though that an issue similar to the camera tilting one upon aiming I have discussed in my previous video applies here as well. Notice how whenever you get up or lay down, the camera tilts towards whatever the pointer is placed upon. And if it's placed on a fairly close geometry, the tilting degree is severe enough to cause disorientation. If you think about surprising enemies by popping out from behind covers like this, well, think again.
Grenade out!
Just like with the aiming issue, the camera tilt occurs with the DualShock 3 as well, but only from a safe distance, so to speak, one that doesn't trigger a too severe camera tilt. If you get closer to whatever you are pointing at, you get no tilt with the DualShock 3, but you still get it with the move. As for the circle button, it does nothing here because its function is context related, allowing to interact with stuff like beacons or satellite dishes.
Man down!
Perform victory dances on victims, and more importantly to attach to cover. The cover system works like you would imagine, allowing to pop out and shoot and stuff, but it's also home for another camera issue when it comes to move controls. See here how the reticle stays on target as I pop out from cover, then fall back behind it with the DualShock 3. With the move instead, popping out works fine, but when getting back behind cover, the camera doesn't return to the initial position. Notice how the camera keeps rotating as I peek and cover here, despite not moving the cursor one bit. This is not too much of an issue in practice, since it's more important for the pointer to stay on target when popping out rather than when getting back to cover, as you can readjust it easily, but still, I don't think this should happen to begin with.
Grenade out! Switching back! Magazines. Back up. Get them. We got them. Now stole our data. Don't let them get any more. They are calling in a strike. Stop them. I'm out. I'm hit. Fuck! We got him.
The only gesture-based action implemented in SOCOM 4 is the forward jab required to perform a knife attack. As with MAG and Killzone 3, it works very well. It's fast, consistent, and doesn't disrupt aiming too much as long as you know what you are doing, which means performing small gestures like you see me doing in the picture-in-picture, instead of actual swinging motions. If done right, knife attacks can be executed successfully in whatever situation, assuming the distance is right.
Look out, you fuckers! Oh fuck, I'm shot! Ah! Oh! Ah! Ah! Oh! They've stolen data. Get it back. We got them. Now...
Alright, let's talk grenades now. To throw them you need to tap L1, and the direction is determined by where you are pointing. Compared to the Killzone 3 implementation though, the flying trajectory is somewhat unpredictable here, especially at short distance.
Now get that data back. We got him. Now get that data back.
The current physics are quite glitchy as well, resulting in some rather odd behaviors. All of this applies to the DualShock 3 controls as well, and is something beta testers have bitched about enough for me to humbly concur and move on. Luckily that was just a smoke. Grenades are just one of the various gear you can bring in battle, and to select it you need to hold down L2 and operate on the D-pad. This means of course that you have to stop to make a selection, which is not the case for the DualShock 3 players, as selection happens via the right stick. So unless you get used to make the selection like you see me doing here in the picture-in-picture, you better be sure to be in a safe spot when switching gear.
Go get the data.
And also be sure you actually selected whatever you want to toss. In fact, as you can see here, the input is not registered immediately as soon as the selection interface shows up, but a few milliseconds later, after this blinking animation. Not a big deal, but since the move users have to stop to select, it would be nice for Zipper to make this limitation more tolerable by removing the extra waiting time, even if minimal. Anyway, aside from the various type of grenades, SOCOM 4 also offers stuff like mines or claymores, which are deployed by pressing L1 as well. There is also a remotely detonatable charge called PE4, which glues to whatever you toss it against and can be detonated from a distance by aiming at it and pressing circle. Finally, in matches which allow free respawns, by completing objectives or reaching a 5-kill streak, you are given the option to call an airstrike. You can choose where to release hell by simply pointing to the intended geometry while holding down the R1 button for a few seconds. Now, before ending this video, I'd like to point out an issue with the hit detection I've noticed when shooting at close targets from a given angle. As you know, during circle strafing in pointer-based shooter, your target ends up being either to the left or to the right of the screen, never in the middle. Now, take a look at these confrontations. Am I really missing the target here? Especially at the beginning, is the bullet's trajectory properly calculated? Here is another one. Pay attention to when I miss the target to the right. Did I really miss it? Now, in third-person shooters, since the camera is pulled back relative to the actual origin of the bullets, what you aim with the pointer is not necessarily what your bullets will hit. With the fixed reticle instead, what you aim at is certainly what you will be hitting when pulling the trigger. As you can see in this demonstration, the closer you get to a target located to one side of the screen, the less accurate your shots get. if your character gets past the target, of course you end up shooting behind it even if the pointer is on it. Now, as you can see in this other test, I'm certainly not past my twin to the left, and yet I'm not hitting him. What I'm actually hitting is the wooden structure farther ahead. While this seems like an error with the way the reticle is projected, it's not consistent enough to call this an oversight. In fact, as you can see here, I eventually hit the target I was missing a second before. So what's going on? Honestly, I'm not sure, but perhaps Zipper can look into this, cause I do have the impression something affects move accuracy in close circle strafing situations. And this is it. Hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of the SOCOM 4 multiplayer beta. Thanks for watching, passo e chiudo.
من ناحية ما اتوقع اني بعدين اشتريها مثلا ممكن اشتريها